You're listening to the Better for America podcast, presented by Amac, the Association of Mature American Citizens.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Weber, and this is your AMAC podcast, Better for America. Today, we're back with the Reb and Rob show, and as always, I'm grateful to have with us our very own AMAC national spokesman, Robert Charles. Bobby has a background that seems especially suited to where we are in American history right now, for better and worse. And so I would just like to remind our viewers today that Bobby served as the Assistant Secretary of State under Colin Powell in the George W. Bush White House, and he managed, among other programs, the setup of America's police training programs in places like Afghanistan, Iraq, Kosovo, and Colombia. And he helped before, during, and after to guide public thinking on how we got to peace in Colombia, and has a depth of understanding when it comes to foreign policy. Moreover, he's a 10-year naval intelligence officer, a reservist who volunteered for active duty on 9/11. And he also served in the Reagan and Bush 41 White Houses, ran a congressional oversight committee for 5 years, taught government oversight at the Harvard Extension School in prior years, and has written hundreds of books and articles, and just love his book called Eagles and Evergreens. It's a great book. I recommend people pick that book up because it highlights the service of World War II veterans, and boy, do we need to hear those stories today more than ever. Now, as our nation works through a very tough time, we are always glad to have with us Bobby because the conversations are good, important, and truthful. So, Bobby, welcome. I'm so happy to be with you today.
What a wonderful introduction, Rebecca, and absolutely, I'm ready to talk about the world. We've got a lot to talk about.
We sure do, Bobby. And here we are, we're looking at this horrible crisis in Afghanistan, and our members see it. Our members are angered, our members are worried, and our members are sad. There's a sense of sadness here. This is a cascading national security failure on the Biden White House, from the Biden White House, in the making, and leadership really across the board, Bobby. We're witnessing dishonor, we're witnessing incompetence, a lack of political will, and what almost seems like a decision to accept the direction or conditions from the Taliban. Afghan terrorists, and we're seeing hundreds, perhaps even thousands of Americans left behind. Now, our supporters and allied Afghans, they are in enormous danger, and they are left behind. So how do you see this crisis? I mean, is it as bad as it looks? Because we do hear sound bites from Biden, for example, when he told us that Al-Qaeda was decimated and wiped off the planet. They were no longer existent. And, sort of trying to reassure Americans that the Afghans will get it together on their own. But I need to ask you, Bobby, what do you see in the near term, the midterm, and the longer term? What are the consequences, and how should we be looking at all of this?
Yeah, this is really not only the question of the moment, Rebecca, and I appreciate that excellent sort of description of where we're at, but it is also something that cannot be swept under the rug. This is a really significant issue globally, and it is actually significant historically. I would tell you, and I'll probably finish with this same thought, but this is an incredibly sobering moment for America. We've got a group in the White House right now, and I include, incidentally, their senior national security team, their Secretary of State, their Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, National Security Advisor, of course, the President and the Vice President, who sort of seem to think this is all a big board game, that you just declare dates and move pieces and it'll all work out fine. No, this isn't going to work out fine. This is not working out fine. So to your question, in the near term, and I'll be very specific here for our members because this is part of my past. I spent some time in that country, and I know I set up the police training in 7 locations in that country. In the near term, we have a really significant problem. That embassy said 2 weeks ago, actually they didn't say, but I've had relayed to me the documents that show that there were people who'd seen them who said that there were between 15,000 and 40,000 Americans in that country. It's called it's a particular document that the embassy has. And this document, by the way, all embassies have them. And what it does, the reason there's a disparity between 15 and 40 is that they sometimes include family members and sometimes they don't. This administration did not set up a task force where people can register to leave. Typically, if the United States is leaving a country, there's a crisis task force set up where people can register. They didn't do that. So our only real document is this F-77 that has these numbers on it. We know because they've admitted now that they only removed 5,500 Americans in the 100,000 plus that they flew out, which includes obviously Afghans who worked with us and those who were just desperate to get out. Because they only removed 5,500 and we know there were a minimum of 15,000, we know there are 9,500 Americans that remain inside that country. Those are contractors. Those are some dual citizens, but mostly contractors, NGOs, people who work with Christian organizations, people who are absolutely desperate to get out because they're now on the Taliban hit list. We also know, I know from the last 2 days, privately having been told that the embassy there gave to the Taliban the list of all the foreign nationals who had worked for our embassy for the last 20 years. It's unbelievable. It just is unimaginable that we would have given away Bagram, that we would have given away the embassy, we would have given away these lists, we would have left Americans there, and we left probably 20,000 of at least of those who worked with us who were promised, they worked for at least 2 years for us, that they would not be abandoned. So the near term is we got to get those people out of there. And I will tell our members that they should know, and this is a little bit of making news, that there is an effort right now, today, underway in Mazar-i-Sharif to get people out to the Ukraine as well as to Uzbekistan, and to get people out of the country. There are also what they call rat lines. People are trying on the ground desperately in panic to get out through any of the provinces they can. We know there were Americans in 22 of the 34 provinces. So the business about the president and the Secretary of State getting up and saying, all is well, mission over, we're done. No, we don't do that. Americans do not leave Americans, dead or alive, behind in foreign countries when they are behind enemy lines. So we are not done, and we are not going to be done until these citizens come home. Midterm, what we need to do is remove this national security team. This is a national security team that has really, in my opinion, has been part of a breach of faith with the American people. Not just the American people in Afghanistan, but the American people at large. We're an idealistic, generous people. We allow certain rooms for error. But golly, Rebecca, when you do something as catastrophic as what they've done here, this would be a vote of no confidence if we were in Great Britain and they'd all be out. So we need to think in terms of who needs to resign, and those resignations probably need to come pretty soon. And finally, long term, this just telegraphs how weak the American leadership is right now. The American people are strong. And the silver lining to me is that so many Americans look at this and see it for what it really is and say, this will not stand. This is not who we are. We are a strong, determined, moral, thoughtful, and by the way, very effective people. And so we have leaders now that are disappointing us. And yeah, we can wait till the elections, but I think we're going to see an awful lot of anger percolating up because, when you have that many Americans that remain in harm's way, never mind the ones that will be put in harm's way because we're now weak and China will lean forward and all these other countries, these congressional offices, their phones are going to burn up because a lot of people are going to be calling and saying, you've really disappointed me. And I don't like being disappointed. So I think there's going to be a sense here that Americans call for accountability at a level that we have not previously. And I don't think the media can get us to pivot away from this. There are other issues, but this one is huge.
This one is so big. And, I think it'll take some time for people to really understand the tremendous threat that we're facing, because for many years, we didn't really hear much of ISIS. And the reason for that was because Donald Trump had done such a good job under his leadership managing things in a way that really tampered down those threats. And now today we see just such an extreme incompetence and a president who is ignoring this looming threat. So, I pray we're coming up on our 20th anniversary of 9/11. This is just, we couldn't be in a worse position. And, Bobby, you're such a great student of history, and we know that credibility is always based on actions. And that's how we reacted in World War I, World War II, and even in Korea, Vietnam, and the first Gulf War right after 9/11. We reflect into the future. Our word is our bond, and America's word has always been the best, strong and true. And that is why we have strong allies.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think that this means for the future on the larger scale, our alliances and our adversaries, such as China, taking advantage of us? Is there a longer term problem that people need to understand?
Yes, there is, and I'll say, Rebecca, that you really have asked a two-pronged question, and it's a very good question. The first prong has to do with what does China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, frankly, all of our adversaries or anyone that might have been an adversary, what do they do in response to this weakness? And the answer is they're going to take advantage of it. They're not stupid. They're going to red team this in effect the same way we would do, except in reverse. They're going to look at this strategically and say, where can we take advantage of the United States now? This is the weakest they have been in the lifetimes of any of these leaders. This is the weakest the United States has been in the lifetime of President Xi or of President Putin. This is the weakest we have ever been in our lifetimes, anybody alive today. And so they're going to look at this and they're going to red team it strategically. And they're going to say, okay, maybe we go into Ukraine, maybe we go into the Baltics, maybe we push the envelope in multilateral organizations, maybe we go into Taiwan, maybe we take the Sakhalin Islands, maybe we take the Spratly Islands, maybe we put pressure on Japan. They're going to look at this strategically. And I'm sure they're going to move into, China will move in and take resources out of Afghanistan. They will also undoubtedly push Pakistan to become part of their road and Belt and Road Initiative. They will look for advantages from Venezuela and Cuba and Central and South America to here. So we're the first piece of your question is absolutely spot on. When weakness is telegraphed, just like if you were playing a game, except this isn't a game. If you see weakness, or if a pack of animals sees weakness in an adversarial a group of animals, they go after it. So weakness is where they're going to go. The second big question, though, the second prong is, to me, maybe even more important, and that is, has what we've just seen here created a credibility gap that means that our allies and even, frankly, Americans looking at this administration say, you lied to us about the number of people that were there. You lied to us about the necessity of getting out. You lied to us about whether or not you had the opportunity to protect Kabul. You lied to us about giving kill lists to the Taliban. You lied to us about a whole bunch of things. And actually, having done all that, do we trust you now that you say you're really going to do something significant on the border, which you're obviously not? Do we trust you when homicide rates are going through the roof in 200 cities, or multiple cities, and you have disruptions in 200 cities? Do we trust you when you say you're going to manage the economy? I think what you've really pointed out is that, and maybe again, this is some sort of a silver lining. Maybe societies that believe in ideals have to be truly disappointed before they recognize that they have to reject those who have betrayed those ideals. And that's really what we're looking at here. This credibility gap, Rebecca, is a serious one. And that's why I say this cannot be swept under the rug. This betrays who these people really are.
Yeah. A friend of mine put it to me this way. I thought this was sort of interesting way to look at it. America is strong, and we've always portrayed ourselves as being the strongest nation on earth. When you're, an analogy might be, if you're being bullied and you're the little guy in the room, and the big bully who's twice as big as you says you can't go through that door, people will understand why you may not go through that door. But when you're the big strong guy, and you're being pushed around by somebody half your size, and they say, don't go through that door, and you listen and don't go through that door, you say, what the heck is going on here? Why are we so afraid? And that's sort of, in my view, how Biden appears, because Americans know the strength of our nation, and they understand that this is not characteristic of America and our behavior. And I think Americans are scratching their head and they're saying, why is the big guy, America, allowing itself to be bullied around
and so let me validate,
and sort of just being ignorant about it all, and stupid about it? Let me
validate that in very concrete terms. We have the strongest military on the face of the planet by multiples. So China doesn't even come close to us. Okay, we also have the strongest economy. And we have the most vibrant economy and the most creative economy. And that's all about our people. It has nothing to do with the government. And so at the end, it has very little to do with the government, except that the government gives the people the freedom to create that strong economy. So we are the big dog. Okay, we are the big force. And what you are pointing out, which it makes it only more infuriating, I think, to most Americans, is that we are not, we, the American people, have a very strong political will, but this administration refuses to have the courage and the political will to act on the capacity, to act on the capability, to act on the ideals and the capability that we bring to the table. So it's like watching a problem that is quite a significant problem that could easily be solved, not be solved. And of course, we look at this and I think you and I, and frankly, AMAC members, we look at this and we say, what don't you get? We are the United States of America. We are the country not only that for our own sake protect freedom and always protect our own, but we protect and are the beacon for the world when it comes to freedom.
Yeah.
And so when we show weakness, it's not just to the detriment of us, it's to the detriment of the principles that were handed to us and the sacrifice that was made not only by us, but by all of our allies who believe in us. And it's, it's like the putting out of a beacon. And so we cannot allow that beacon to go out, Rebecca. That's the bottom line. We, the people, have to continue to make the point and eventually with new leadership make the point that this country needs to exercise the powers that it has for the sake of goodness, because otherwise evil prevails.
Amen. Very good. Well said, Bobby. I know that we have so many other issues I want to discuss with you, and they relate to the continuing crisis at our border. And I'm afraid that because so many eyes and focus is on Afghanistan, that we're forgetting that there is a continuing crisis there. So we're seeing drug overdoses. We're seeing rising inflation, Democrat cities awash in high crime. But I want to stay for one moment on this Afghan crisis. Somehow I think pivoting away and just saying, oh, well, accountability is needed.
Yeah.
That's really not enough, Bobby. Certainly accountability is needed, but that's not enough. So let me ask you, as a student of history again, does the Biden administration's handling of this crisis create, well, we spoke about the credibility gap, and I agree with you that we've got a major credibility gap, but does this tell us something about how they manage domestic policy as well?
Yes.
In other words, and I know that maybe we're repeating the same thing here, but if we look at Afghanistan as an example of how he's handling something that's right out there on the world stage for all to see, how does that relate to how he'll manage domestic policy, such as the crisis at the border wall?
Yeah, I think this is actually a different question and a good question. And the answer is, it's not just about a credibility gap. It's about management. It's about management. I mean, you are a manager, you are a leader. Many of our AMAC members have lived lives as leaders, and they know that there's a difference between leadership and management. One involves a degree of inspiration and a degree of people engagement that goes beyond just pushing paper and numbers. But this administration appears through this Afghanistan crisis to be telegraphing not only to us, but to the world that they really don't know how to manage. They don't know how to manage the economy. They don't know how to manage the border. They're not managing this pandemic very effectively. They're completely contradictory in what they're putting out. I am seriously worried about public health and safety. I'm worried about the safety part too, which is the support for law enforcement, which is the support for security in the cities and the suburbs. When you let something go, just like if you let an infectious disease go and you do nothing, ultimately it spreads, right, to some degree. And so that has nothing to do with the pandemic. It has to do with the idea that in our cities, we're seeing insecurity. We're seeing homicides rise. We're seeing property crime rise. We're seeing carjackings rise. And that eventually spreads to the suburbs. And eventually it undermines people's sense of security. So you're pointing out something that I don't think many are talking about that ought to be talked about. And that is that this Afghanistan debacle is not just a failure of political will. And it is not just a failure of understanding our history and our ideals. It's a failure of management. It's a planning failure. Okay, the reason that they are under such stress and have been, and ultimately, I think this accountability stuff is gonna hit them like a rock, because it's real. I mean, you can't get away from this. Is that they also completely botched the management of this extraction. So really, a multi-month botch. So there's pieces of this that were done deliberately that we should hold people accountable for. The State Department eliminated their CCR bureau in July. That's their evacuation bureau. Why? Because they wanted to avoid responsibility for evacuations. Donald Trump had set that bureau up a year ago, more than a year ago, and it was incredibly effective. It actually extracted 100,000 Americans from around the world, evacuated AMSITs back here, okay, last year. State Department abolished it. And sort of quietly pretended Consular Affairs, which is a paper pushing bureau, was going to be able to do evacuations. No, what they did is they pushed it over on the Defense Department. So that's a concrete act of knowing mismanagement or intentional deflection of responsibility. But we're also seeing that when they're given the simplest tasks, they can't manage them. So, I mean, that you're right. It betrays a very significant domestic policy problem, too, which is that these people don't know what they're doing.
They don't. They clearly don't. We can look at things like policing, for example, and Rudy Giuliani did a fine job. Mm-hmm. I think when you have a well-trained system and people that are managed properly, you can see things like crime in our policing decrease substantially. And we saw that. So if we just look at history, for example, under Giuliani, we saw good management of how he handled New York City. We see the good things that came out of that. And I think, Bobby, it was you and I were talking offline. And one of the things that you said to me, and it stuck in my mind, is, Rebecca, how we do something is just as important what we do. In other words, many people agree, we should have pulled out of Afghanistan, and that 20 years was too long for us to be there. So some and all or many may agree on that point. But how we go about doing it is just as important as the decision to pull out. And it's the how, where they really a complete failure. And you said it, they're doing it right here in America. We see failure after failure. Mm-hmm. Bobby, I want to switch gears because we have an economy that's getting beaten down more and more. Yeah. We see so much irresponsible federal spending. AMAC members, by the way, they are against that $1.3 trillion spending for infrastructure. And they're certainly against this big behemoth $3.5 million that we're hearing about that Nancy Pelosi wants so much. I mean, Congress has spent us into a horrible hole with 2 more infrastructure bills out there. And there's really not so much construction or infrastructure in this bill. We see socialist priorities, things that Americans really don't want. And AMAC members especially, Bobby, they are deeply aware of the impact of the federal debt and the impact that the federal debt has on our way of life, raising inflation. It stifles the private sector. I have many, many friends who are business owners, and many are in trouble. So we see that these leftist socialist policies will trigger higher taxes. It's going to crush the middle class. We're going to see a greater divide between the very wealthy and the very poor. We're going to see higher interest rates. So we are not being well served by this Congress or White House, since they seem to think that federal spending comes with zero consequences. And yet, as we have moved from millions to billions, and then from hundreds of billions to now trillions, there are tremendous impacts.
Yes.
Bobby, you have a graduate degree in economics from Oxford. So help us understand, what does this massive spending really mean? Because average, ordinary people, they hear the number trillion, and they may not immediately feel their wallet. They may not feel the impact personally. So my question is, it's coming. What's coming? What do we need to understand about this massive spending? And what can we do to get a better handle on it?
The most remarkable thing about that question, Rebecca, is that Americans, I grew up in a place where education wasn't particularly the front of mind. People were interested in feeding their families, and I was lucky to get out and get an interesting education. But I don't think you need an education to have common sense. And I think a lot of people have a what seems like a robust education don't have common sense. And this is one of the most remarkable things, because the economy, as you said, hits you in the wallet. You don't need a graduate degree to say, hey, I can't pay for things I could pay for last year, or I can't keep as many people on the job, even though I'm running a small business and trying to make ends meet. Or my inventory is now twice as expensive and it isn't moving. So let's get down to basics here. $1 trillion, you make such a great point. There used to be, we were aghast when hundreds of millions were spent on our behalf. And frankly, that was also often for things that we didn't think were necessary. The federal government has grown by hundreds, literally by hundreds of times since the 1940s. But we're in a situation right now where $1 trillion, and people just need to think about this a little bit, because we don't think about it. $1 trillion is a million. That's a one with 12 zeros behind it. Okay. That's a huge sum of money. And we've got Pelosi and Schumer and Biden bouncing that word around like $1 trillion is nothing. So here's the reality. This country is teetering right now. And I don't know if people have the concept in mind of a tipping point, but it's not that hard a concept either. And that is, you put a pebble on the end of the scale and everything was in equipoise, not happily, but it was in equipoise. And now that pebble tips everything. Okay. We are at the point right now with the debt ceiling that we're about to face, an likely elevated debt ceiling. It's a huge vote in September. We're at $28.7 trillion in national debt. They're going to try to raise it again. Okay. When you add $1 trillion to that, or, and by the way, in one fell swoop, never mind 3.5 trillion, or if you add the two up, 4.7 trillion. When you add that kind of money, you have to start asking, what is the effect of that? And the answer is, you push us into a tipping point environment. Inflation already is bad. It's now going to skyrocket. That's going to affect pensions. That's going to affect credit card debt. That's going to affect variable rate mortgages. That's going to affect the cost that you have to pay at the grocery store. That's going to affect the cost you have for your kids' education if you're trying to do a private education. It's going to affect all kinds of things. What happens then? Well, the way that traditionally it works is that when inflation goes up, the Federal Reserve says, gosh, we need to unheat the economy. We need to somehow bring it down. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to raise interest rates. So what does that do? It raises private interest rates. So when you're paying on something, interest rates go up, a credit card. It also raises the interest rates at the same time on all that national debt, that $30 trillion in national debt. So what does that mean? If we don't have the money to cover that, what do? We borrow. So now we're going to borrow more money to cover the borrowing that we didn't have room for at the beginning. And what's happening? You've got members of Congress, particularly Democrat members, who don't seem to understand that this isn't your money. This isn't even my money. This isn't even our kids' money. This is our great-grandkids' money. We are spending money we don't have, okay? And so you got to say, time out. We need to start remembering that fiscal responsibility is not someone else's job, okay? It's our job. And as Americans, we're telling our members of Congress, by the way, it's your job. You need to start understanding that we mean it when we say fiscal responsibility matters, or we're not going to have Social Security. We're not going to have any of the things that we've promised future generations will exist. Never mind the fact that we'll have a hard time paying for national defense, having given away hundreds of billions just now to the Taliban. We're going to have difficulty paying for all kinds of things. And so, the gist is here that you can either get an economy moving in a virtuous cycle where you have jobs that create investment, that create consumption, that create jobs, that create a stable currency, that create a stable economy, and people have predictability. So they go to build a house, they go to retire, or you can have the other circle. You can have a vicious cycle. And the vicious one is one in which inflation generates ultimately reduced growth, and you have irrational expectations by unions who try to drive wages up because they're trying to catch up with what tomorrow's inflation rate will be. And that creates what Jimmy Carter had, although this would be much worse because the debt was not as high then. But you create stagflation, and stagflation is high unemployment with high inflation. And that's a formula for slowing everything down. So never mind COVID. So, I think what we have to remember here is, again, just as you said a minute ago, Rebecca, there's good leadership and there's bad leadership. There's good management and there's bad management. There's trustworthy leadership and there's those for whom we have a credibility gap. And everything we're seeing here reinforces the idea that we've got an incompetent crowd who is claiming competence. And if we're not careful, they're gonna wreck the economy too.
Yeah, and we know what happens when you do that at home with your own money. It
Yeah.
leads to bankruptcy. Some of us may know people that got in over their head and borrowed and borrowed and borrowed just to, borrowed from Peter to pay Paul. And when you
That's
do
right.
that over and over again, eventually the mortgage company comes after you
Hmm.
and they repossess your vehicle. And these are the
Hmm.
kinds of things on a much greater scale that we can expect to happen unless there's some real effort made to say we've
Yes,
got to curb our spending.
you're
And the
so
other thing I think that's good for people to recognize and understand is that we don't have a demand issue problem in America that's slowing things down. We've got a supply problem. In other words, we've got fewer people working. It's harder to get goods, moved. And, people need to understand. See, the thing about it, Bobby, is that it sounds pretty simple, right? We're spending more, we're printing money.
hmm
And our members, our AMAC members, they're so smart. They really get it. I mean, just take a look at the comments that are left on our website, on our social media posts, on our news app. If people haven't downloaded the news app, boy, do that, because we're talking so much about these bills, and we're fighting back each and every day. But it matters. It matters that people understand what it's all about,
hmm
and it matters that they know what it means, because we've got to vote the right people in office that actually take this stuff seriously.
You're making
Bobby,
me
I just
think.
want to shift for a minute. What's that?
You're making me think of something, Rebecca, that I just want to mention. It's a short
Yeah.
point, but you're making me think. When I was a young man, I worked for Ronald Reagan, and they often said that Ronald Reagan was elected on 6 words: strong defense, smaller government, lower taxes. And of course, he had a good moral compass, and he had a great self-deprecating sense of humor. Um, we could tell
Yes.
his jokes all day long, but the point is, those 6 words are what we, I think, should be thinking about when we elect new leaders, and it's what we don't have now: strong defense, smaller government, lower taxes. We got the exact reverse. We've got a pitiful, poor defense, both abroad and at our border and at home. So security. We've got a growing, overwhelmingly large government trying to spend more of our money. And we have proposals on the table to dramatically raise, both directly and through inflation indirectly, taxes on the middle class. So it's a clear choice. I mean, we either go with this failed leadership or we pick new people.
Yeah. Bobby, I do want to shift gears. I want to talk about something that sometimes is difficult to talk about and probably does not get enough attention. But too many families, too many American families are suffering because of drug abuse. And we're seeing, and I want to talk about this because it ties directly to drug trafficking
Yeah.
and what's happening at the southern border. But we're seeing more and more Americans that are caught up in addiction, people dying of drug overdose. The narcotics issue is real and it's growing.
Mhm.
And it's sort of like the proverbial elephant in the room, right? We're not supposed to talk about it, I suppose, because it's so tough to talk about. But with that being said, you've spent so much of your life helping people through this tough social issue. You even wrote a book on it, which is great. And so you understand the tie between drug trafficking and terrorism. And you've been a voice of reason and understanding here. So, having run programs that were tied to drug prevention and treatment around the world, I mentioned in Colombia and Peru, Thailand, you've also helped parents back here at home, right here in the United States. So, how do we get on top of this problem?
Yeah.
If
So
I know that's a broad question,
no, it's a
and
good.
there's a lot there to uncover, but what do we do? What are some of the first steps we need to take as a nation to
Yeah.
protect our U.S. citizens?
Yeah, you are doing what most politicians don't do, which is to talk about the difficult issues, and this is a difficult one for Americans. We just know from data that was released a month ago that we lost 93,000 young people to overdoses last year. That was a 30% jump. We've never seen anything like that. You are right that there are two sides to this problem. One is supply reduction and the other is demand reduction. So the supply reduction piece means that you work with foreign countries and you work at your own border to support law enforcement and to reduce the incoming highly potent narcotics. So what are those narcotics? Believe it or not, most of the narcotics that are killing our children in this country and young people and some older people are not narcotics that are made in this country. They are fentanyl, they are cocaine, they are the distillate crack from cocaine, they are heroin, and they are synthetics that are made abroad and cross our borders. Sometimes they come by mail, sometimes they come over the southern border. They very often come over the southwest border. So these drug traffickers, and there are, as people know, named organizations in Mexico and Colombia and Dominican Republic and El Salvador, but in particular, and China, but particularly coming out of Mexico, there are named organizations that drug traffic straight in here and have these these little, if you will, capillaries of distribution all over the United States. So we have to get on top of that. We have done that in the past. We have done it effectively under President Reagan and under President George Herbert Walker Bush. We were starting to take steps in that direction under President Trump, and we did also take strong steps in that direction under George W. Bush. The other piece of this is, in many ways, though, is in some ways the other half of the canoe in order to get across the lake is the demand reduction piece, Rebecca. And it is vitally important that we get the right information to parents, that we get the right information to students, that we get the right information to our young people from the earliest age straight through their early 20s, so that they understand that, it can take you 10 minutes to become addicted, and it can take you 10 years to get off an opioid addiction. Okay. It can kill you before you even are subject to the potential for death. You don't get second chances with fentanyl, and fentanyl might be sprinkled on marijuana, or it might be distributed separately, or it might be part of another synthetic. Okay. You don't get second chances today. We need to remind people that there are treatment resources if you do get caught in this web, and there are highly credible treatment sources, and not to name them, but they're out there in each state. There is not a governor in this country. There is not a mayor in this country. There is not a school superintendent in this country that does not have under their authority kids in particular who are in deep trouble right now. And we have to talk to parents about talking to their kids about drugs. I always marveled that the average over the last 20 years or so is that only about 25% of parents ever talk to their kids about the dangers associated with drug addiction. How many times do we tell our kids, look right and look left before you cross a road? But we don't tell them, hey, by the way, this can hit you and kill you. And we don't want you to get into that trap. And if you get into that trap, we want to help you get out of that trap. It's a hard trap to get out of. But, we need to start talking about this issue like we care about our families, like we care about our neighbors, like we care about our communities, like we're Americans, okay? Americans do not, this is its own epidemic. This is an epidemic that kills far more people over time than anything we've recently experienced. This is an epidemic that takes down whole communities in one blow. And we have to say, this is not going to be our future. Our future has to be healthy. Our future has to be secure. We have to care enough about our students, about our family members, about our coworkers, about the children of our coworkers, about the people that are living a few blocks away that you never met. We got to start caring about them because they are us.
Bobby, it is so true, and we need to hear it. And I think to myself, what are some of the things that we can do? And I think being engaged with your local school see, here's what gets under my skin. So many schools, they're teaching the wrong things. They're teaching things like, oh, let's talk to Sally to see if she wants to be a boy or a girl today, or let's make sure that Joey's got his mask pulled up all the way to, you know what I'm saying? It's like, when in fact, what's really important is working with families and encouraging families, really supplying families with the kinds of tools that they might need, whether it be books, information, because a lot of parents may not understand how easy it is and what is really on the street. In other words, they may just have that mentality, that's not my home, not my child, or that stuff doesn't come around here on this street, when in fact, it really is very prevalent,
Well, and in
more so
fact,
than what people realize. This
and I want to,
conversation needs to
yeah,
continue.
you're absolutely right, Rebecca. And I want to add something here that people won't think is important, but it is important. THC is the narcotic element that you find in marijuana. Okay. And so it is addictive. Okay. This is an objective fact. You don't have to take my word for it. You can look at NIH. You can look at anywhere you want. It's addictive. The notion that marijuana is harmless. Okay. Marijuana is not harmless. And so what you see is that a lot of this progressive behavior, so moving into heroin, moving into, which people never imagined. You ask somebody on the street, are you ever going to become a heroin addict? They're going to say, are you kidding me? No, of course not.
Sure.
Are you ever going to inject a drug? Of course not. Well, what happens is that the inhibitions fall as the addiction or the potency rises. And so what happens, it's called price elasticity of demand. The demand for that, for another high continues to increase over time. Okay. And so, whether you're talking medicine or economics, the bottom line is that an addictive drug creates a propensity for greater addiction and greater potency in other drugs. By the way, that also is true if someone starts with heroin. The reason that they move to fentanyl is they're looking for more of a high. So at the end of the day here, by the way, that's also true of methamphetamine, which is a huge problem out west and is growing on us again, another synthetic. So the point I'm trying to make is when a national policymaker or a local policymaker says, don't worry about marijuana, actually do worry about marijuana, okay? And if you're a parent, you need to understand that there's a very big difference between a narcotic. A narcotic gets into the fat cells of the brain and it stays there for 30 days or more. It doesn't matter that you're not using it again after the first use. Alcohol doesn't do that. It's water-based. It's not fat-based. So you have problems with alcohol too. There's no question about that. And acute events with alcohol are just as dangerous as an acute event with a narcotic. But there is a scientific understanding of what a narcotics addiction is. And when we have people loosely, without science, saying, and without any sense of evidence-based connectivity, saying, oh, this is harmless. No, this is not harmless, okay? Addiction is addiction is addiction. And a lot of people, the number one drug that people voluntarily seek treatment for nationwide is marijuana. Okay, so people need to understand that you may say, well, I'm not going to overdose on marijuana. Well, you may not go around that corner too fast. You may not hit somebody this time, but you may hit them the next time. And the point is, you can't take these kinds of risks. And as a parent, you need to inform your kids, look, there's a healthy lifestyle and then there's an unhealthy lifestyle. There's stuff that you can do at risk without having tremendous downstream effects. And there's stuff that's going to be really, really, really bad for you over time. And the thing I'll also say, Rebecca, is it worries me that teachers and superintendents and principals don't understand the magnitude. As you said a moment ago, they're more worried about a mask than they are whether their kid is using a narcotic. And that's worrisome to me. That's a misunderstanding of priorities.
That's exactly right. Bobby, thank you. Thank you. I just want to close up today with one last question because I'm always uplifted, and I think our listeners are too, by your stories. So perhaps you can offer us a few today about life experiences that give us hope, because this is such a time of great uncertainty. And I'm thinking of several pieces that you've written. They bring so much hope, Bobby. And one was the resilience of Theodore Roosevelt. He's one of my favorites. And how his life gives us an example of a can-do attitude. And I think that's why I really like him. Yeah. A second is your piece this week on the miraculous recovery of the American eagle. Mm-hmm. So perhaps you can offer us, as we look at our alliances being rattled, some story about us and our European alliances that give us a different perspective.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely, Rebecca. And let's close out with the understanding that life is full of hope, okay? I once heard it said, and I think it's absolutely the truth, that all of those that got to success had to encounter failure first. And we as a people have to go through rough waters in order to understand what is expected of us and what we expect of ourselves, and that we're not going to tolerate certain things. And because we're not going to tolerate those things, we're going to fix it. We're gonna get in there politically and fix it. So on Theodore Roosevelt, I love Theodore Roosevelt. I've written chapters in books about him. I've written law review articles about him. Here's a young man who is born into a New York family, and his father's a big philanthropist, and who actually helped set up the Natural History Museum in New York. And he was born, I think on 33rd, something 36th, 37th Street, somewhere downtown. And he was actually a very sickly young man. He loved the great outdoors. He loved birds in particular, but he was sickly. And when he finally, he managed to get into Harvard, and he gets to Harvard and he consulted a doctor, and the doctor said, "Oh my gosh, you have a terrible heart condition, and you will have to lead a sedentary life." Well, Theodore Roosevelt is the living embodiment of a man who did not lead a sedentary life. He literally took that unto himself, joined the boxing team, started going to the Maine woods to go test himself, started building himself up physically, started doing all these things that would make him stronger. The last thing in the world you want to tell a young person with conviction is that they can't do something. And that's the can do, that's the hope, that's the go for it. And so what happens? He encountered a lot of adversity in his life. His father died at 46 before he ever got out of Harvard. He loved his father dearly. His mother, and he married before he got out of college, to Alice Lee, and she was having their first child, and she died in childbirth, and she died the same day that her mother, that Theodore Roosevelt's mother died. So he gets this double whammy, and then shortly after losing his father, he loses his wife. He's got a young child. He's just in a complete state of these are the kinds of things that either make you stronger or break you. And he said, "It's not going to break me." So his sister helped take care of his daughter. He went out west and he learned to be a cowpuncher. He was a cowboy for a couple of years, and he helped with law enforcement, and he was a cowboy. He came back a stronger man, and married one of his high school, actually young friends, Edith, and with that remarriage had 4 boys. And from that point on, it's like a rocket ship. He became the police commissioner of New York, and he said, "We're going to straighten this place out." He fired 10,000 police officers, and he said, "You can get your jobs back when you are morally fit and physically fit, and there'll be a test for both," and completely reshaped New York's police department. It was such a powerful move, and he had been a young legislator for a couple of years in a very low-key kind of way, who went after graft, that the New York bosses, Boss Platt and the big corruption in New York, they really didn't like this. They thought, who is this guy? Well, the next thing you know, he runs for governor, and he won. And he starts to take them down, and he started to prosecute crime all over the place. A Rudy Giuliani kind of character, but with intensity. And they said, "Oh my God! I mean, he's tearing up our crime syndicates here." So they decided, we're going to put this guy. Meantime, he had taken time off to storm San Juan Hill, for which he later wins the Congressional Medal of Honor in 1898. He's just an unbelievable guy. There's 1,000 other things he does, but the bosses say, "We got to get you out of here because you're messing up our world." So at that time, a dead-end job, believe it or not, as John Adams once said, was the vice presidency, because you go for a month and then you're done and you're gone. And the only thing you do. So they actually engineered for him not to be able to be governor. They pushed him to the vice presidency under McKinley. Such a non-office was this that after the event, TR was very discouraged because he felt that he had been sidelined. And he took his kids camping in the White Mountains, and he went up and just set out and had an extended camping trip up in the White Mountains. And only when it was in September of 1903, when a pony rider was come tearing up toward Mount Washington, and they were looking down, and he said, "There's only one reason that a pony rider would be cruising up here to try to find me." And sure enough, McKinley had been killed. And so all of a sudden, Theodore Roosevelt's the president of the United States. And what he had done for New York, he started to do for America. And founded all these national parks that we know and love. Ended the Russo-Japanese War, won the Nobel Prize for that. set up and made possible the Panama Canal. His list of achievements is just unbelievable. Put through antitrust laws so that the average person could make it. Pushed the 19th Amendment so that women had the vote. Sent the Great White Fleet around the world to say America will deter bad acts all over the world, and that will be something we stand for. Tried to stop World War I. He actually went over to Kaiser Wilhelm and sat with him and said, "Don't do this," but didn't succeed in that. But the bottom line is, this guy took the bull by the horns and never looked back. And there are some wonderful books written about him. Unbelievably, he died in his early 60s. And yet he got all this done. And so I say, and by the way, this kid who was said to have, you got to sit down, be quiet, and have a sedentary life. So for all those millennials, for all those people who feel, hey, I'm soft and I need to take it easy on life, remember people like TR, because TR said, don't ever tell me what I can't do. Okay, I'm going to go out there, very patriotic, wrote 37 books in all of this. How he managed to do that, I have no idea. Became the world's leading expert on grizzly bears. I mean, just an amazing guy all the way. So, and then just to flip the channel for a minute, I think we just need to remember who we are, right? We have enormous potential. The future is undefined as a nation and as individuals. And I think part of what we have to do is remember to wake up with hope in our hearts, the way that our founders did, who had no antibiotics, they had no television, they had no iPhones, they had none of the rest of it. Yet people like Jefferson framed out with Madison and Adams and Washington and Monroe and Hamilton, they framed out this idea that there were these rights that really needed to be protected around the world, and they need to start here. And we asserted those rights, and they put everything on the line. They gave their entire lives and families to us, is what they did, right? And then,
and we need to remember those are God-given rights, not rights that are given to us by a government.
That's
but
right.
Rights that we are born with, natural rights.
They're natural rights, they're God-given rights. And so powerful was that realization, that idea that Providence was truly in the corner of America, that we were going to frame out these rights and make them real for the first time in mankind's history. That when we did that, this guy named Lafayette over in France came over and said, I'm with you. I'm going to put my whole life, family, and fortune behind you guys winning over here. And he did, and they did. And then Jefferson went back to France and said, I'll help you write, which they did, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is why every organization and country in the world, including the Taliban, uses these words human rights as if that's what they're going to aspire to, which they're not. But the point is, the standard was set by the United States of America, by our founders, with incredible risk to themselves personally, with incredible loss, incidentally. And in a time when we didn't have any of the advantages we have today. So if they could do it then, we sure as heck can do it now. And I think we just need to resolve ourselves that, have a little spine, realize they're going to be hard times, and also realize that failure is a good thing. Failures that we witness around us strengthen us to succeed the next time. And that's what we got to do, Rebecca.
That's right. Tell us a little bit about this other second piece on the miraculous recovery of the American eagle.
Yes. So what a funny story this is, really. The founders tried to figure out what to make a symbol of for our country. And in particular, there was a little committee set up by Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and John Adams. They couldn't agree. They wanted different things. Some of them were incredibly complicated. They wanted to go back to a combination of biblical and then Roman and then natural, all kinds of things. So finally they disbanded. A couple of committees later, they come up with the idea of the bald eagle. The bald eagle is a very powerful, kind of top of the hierarchy, historically significant, like a lion, has real, shows up in the Bible, has some significance there too. So the bald eagle becomes the thing. And at that time, there were about 100,000 pairs of eagles, they estimate at the time. Unfortunately, the eagle is also a predator. And also, the pioneers were going west, and basically there was less and less habitat, and there were it wasn't a protected animal, and so it began to shrink in terms of total numbers of bald eagles in the country. And actually, even by the 1940s, we talked earlier in this program about virtuous cycles and vicious cycles, and it kind of got on a vicious cycle because they started to take down the numbers, and then there were fewer and fewer. And in the 1940s, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, said, hey, we're going to lose all these eagles. By the time John Kennedy's president, we are losing all the eagles. And in 1972, there were less between Kennedy's days and the early 70s, we got down to 412 nesting pairs in the country. Less than 50 nesting pairs per state. That's not very many left. That's real close to extinction. So Americans at large, Republicans and Democrats, got together and said, even before you had the EPA, they said, we got to save our national bird. And so there was this concerted effort, and people who lived through it will remember that we really made the effort to save this bird. And again, it goes to the point that when Americans put their mind to something, they get it done. This year, 2021, there are 317,000 of those birds.
Ah, isn't that lovely? And my mother, she loves to watch the camera that captures the babies that are born, and it's really just really marvelous.
And it's a beautiful story because it shows that when we care about something, we can make it happen.
We can make it happen. What a great way to wrap the show up today, Bobby. It really is. Well, as always, Bobby, it's just an honor to sit with you and hear from you and to hear these great stories. Thank you for all that you do for AMAC. You've been on the airwaves. You've been getting the word out. You've been speaking truth to the American people, and I appreciate what you do each and every day for us. To everyone listening, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. Please be sure to share, like this podcast. Let your friends and family know that there is an organization that watches out for you. AMAC is a 50-plus organization, but anyone can join. Our goal and our mission is to better the lives of all Americans, especially those 50 and older. And if you haven't checked out some of our latest member benefits, go to our website. We're adding member benefits by the day. People are saving money. So for $16 a year, you're subscribing to the AMAC bi-monthly magazine. Folks, you should have received the last copy. We talked about critical race theory. We have a ton of information on our website about critical race theory and what you can do to get involved. We even have some free learning that teaches people how to run for their local school board and the tools that you need in order to identify if critical race theory is in your local school district. And if you haven't downloaded the AMAC News app, folks, please do that. You'll get breaking news, a lot of stories, informative articles from people like Robert Charles. So be sure to download the News app. It's free. It's easy. You can go right to your right on your iPhone. Set it up so you do get notifications and get the news that you won't get anywhere else. So I want to thank everyone for tuning in today. For all of you out there, God bless you. Thank you for being a part of AMAC, the fastest growing conservative organization in America. Until next time, everyone, I'm Rebecca Weber. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Better for America podcast. To learn more about AMAC and all it has to offer, visit us at www.amac.us.